Hi, I'm Manuel Quinones. I'm editor at E&E Daily. We're talking about the State of the Union, and even though President Trump didn't say all that much about energy and environment issues, there's still a lot of talk about what's going to happen and what the little he said actually means for policy coming up. And we have a team of folks who've been covering it. Nick Sobczyk, who's been covering infrastructure for us, then Pam King, who covers natural resources for Energy Wire and the rest of the newsroom, and then Zack Colman, who is our top White House reporter here. And I guess we'll get it started. So Zack, he didn't say much, but what did you hear? What did you hear between the lines? What stuck out to you?
Well, I mean, he's going about promoting energy dominance. I'm not actually sure if he actually said the terms, but it was very clear that the administration wants to promote its energy exports and views it as a good for the economy. You definitely didn't hear anything about climate change, and that is what we expected. Didn't hear Paris Climate Accord, didn't hear Clean Power Plan, but it very much stuck with his anti-regulation, pro-fossil fuel agenda that he has stuck to since this campaign.
Yeah. And I know you folks at Climate Wire did a fact check of the president, and one of the things he said was that, coal is back, everything's back. Any perspective on that, like how accurate were his energy and environment statements? If you can.
Well, if you look at like a temporal frame of this past year, coal had a good year, oil and gas had a good year. Now, coal in the long term is not supposed to do as well as it did this past year. There's a lot of Asian demand for coal, and it's projected to take a downswing next year. Oil and natural gas, they definitely are booming, and they're projected to for a while. Does it have anything to do with President Trump? That's not necessarily certain. It's not necessarily true, because the markets are driving those decisions.
And Pamela, you wrote about the energy dominance issue, which the president alluded to. What was your takeaway?
So yeah, we didn't hear energy dominance specifically in the speech. Energy got about 2 sentences in the speech, but it was notable that it came right after President Trump's mention of his deregulatory efforts. One that we've been tracking at Energy Wire is the Bureau of Land Management's methane and waste prevention rule. And Interior is expected to be rewriting that rule later this year. So I think we can watch the agencies for some more action on that front.
Yeah, exactly. And so we got just, snippets, but I guess if you read between the lines, it's like, what can we expect to happen? Are we expecting a lot more deregulation? Are we expecting a lot more activity in the agencies? What does it tell you?
Well, Interior has certainly laid out energy dominance and increased energy production as one of its top priorities. So we can expect to see more action on that front from them for sure. Another thing that energy is kind of baked into is Trump's infrastructure plans. A lot of the energy trade groups were reacting yesterday, saying they're very excited to hear more on that front. They're excited about the potential for gas pipelines. They're excited about the potential for energy infrastructure jobs.
And we'll come back to you on that. Nick, you've been kind of following the infrastructure issue broadly. A lot of plans leaked ahead of the speech, and then we were expecting a lot from the president, or at least some people were expecting a lot from the president. What did we actually get?
Well, we got a couple lines. He said that he was expecting $1.5 trillion in total investment. That includes investments from state and local governments, as well as a $200 billion federal investment. That's $500 billion more than what he had originally proposed. He also said some things about permitting reform. He said that he'd like to see the permitting time for infrastructure projects go down to 2 and maybe 1 year. That's consistent with one of the leaked plans that was leaked to the Washington Post earlier this week, or actually late last week, where he said that he wanted to put a 2-year time limit on permitting under the National Environmental Policy Act. But all in all, it wasn't all that different from what we've been hearing from the president for almost a year now. I mean, he made some similar comments in his address to the joint session of Congress last year, and lawmakers are still awaiting details, really.
And something interesting is that what we're seeing is sometimes in Washington people simplify things, and we have Democrats are resistant to permitting reform and Republicans are for permitting reform. But from what you've been seeing, there's some nuance there, especially on road projects and things that are not as impactful.
Right. There's been some bipartisan compromises on that in the past, and there are certainly some moderate members, particularly in the Senate. Senator Tom Carper has said that he'd be open to permitting reform. However, I think if the Trump administration proposes what we saw from the leaked draft, the Washington Post leaked draft, I doubt there would be much room for negotiation on those things with Democrats. Although I'm not sure the Trump administration is going to get its wish on what it has proposed in that draft.
And turning back to Pam, you mentioned that the energy industry is really excited about this infrastructure push because even though you hear infrastructure, you hear roads and bridges and rail, they're thinking about it much more broadly. What do you hear, and what do they want to happen, including on permitting reform on the energy issue?
Sure. Streamlined permitting. That's been the push from industry, including on the oil and gas permitting front on public lands. I'm sure they're going to be making a similar push with this infrastructure initiative as well. I think during the speech we heard more about roads, bridges, those kinds of projects, but it's heavily implied that energy will be a part of that as well.
And Zack, what are you thinking in terms of what's going to happen in terms of the climate discussion coming from the administration? The president didn't mention it, but we've done stories about how some people are being more nuanced in how they talk about climate change. What's coming up on that topic?
I don't think you're going to see a lot on climate change explicitly. That's not part of this administration's agenda. They are about promoting energy sources that they view as an economic win for the U.S., but to them, that it's not about climate. It's not something that enters into the mindset. This is about pure economics, and you look at the way that they've described their regulatory efforts, assigning zero cost benefits to environmental rules, and that's a telling. I mean, that's where their mindset is.
Now, from your sources at the White House, so is this infrastructure push really the next thing, or is the administration going to keep focusing on a whole bunch of different things and us not really know what?
I think this is one of those things that's going to occupy a good portion of the next year. Keep in mind that the politics are going to get a little bit fraught with a midterm election coming up. And, you've seen in the past infrastructure bills be bipartisan. You had Jim Inhofe, one of the most conservative members of the Senate, work with Barbara Boxer, one of the most liberal members of the Senate, to pass infrastructure bills here and there over the course of several years. But that wasn't President Obama making it his main legislative push for any given year. Now you have President Trump making this his number one priority in an election year where he is historically unpopular and Democrats have a chance to flip an entire chamber. The bipartisanship that existed on these kinds of deals in the past might not be there this time.
And then, Saab, we're going to see a plan from the White House pretty soon, they say?
That's the expectation, although that's been the expectation for months, going on a year now. Lawmakers had been saying earlier this month that they were expecting the White House to release a plan directly after the State of the Union. Now, DJ Gribbin, who is the White House lead on infrastructure, told the Conference of Mayors, U.S. Conference of Mayors, last week that it should be 1 to 2 weeks. So we're looking for it in, if not this week, then next week. But the timeline is still a little bit unclear.
Any parting thoughts from you, Pam, or Zack? Anything we can look forward to?
Well, I think this bill really is going to be one of the biggest things out of the gate for the year, and it's going to attract a lot of attention, and they're going to try to make it as broad as they can in terms of the projects that can qualify for funding, in a hope of bringing more partners to the table on both sides of the aisle. Because the thing about infrastructure bills is you've always been able to take something home for your base, for your state, for your district. A lot of these are authorizing bills too, so you don't actually have to put a lot of money behind them. So that's the thing that I'm looking out for this year.
Yeah, the White House also released some agency priorities during the speech. And for the Interior Department, which I've covered closely, that's reorganization,
Yes.
which will be a big part of the permitting streamlining push.
Exactly. And in Congress, we still are working on spending legislation, fiscal 2018, that's still not done. CR running out next week, and then soon after the budget is scheduled to come out, and we're already reading reports about potential proposals to do deep cuts for renewable energy. So we'll keep covering it, and thank you for watching, and thank you for reading.